Chief Constable was happy, Mooney was happy, press were happy, everything was wonderful. But there was plenty of slap and tickle, no doubt about it. People were being assaulted. There was no training in forms of mistreatment. There was nothing like that. But some men were known for their use of force and could be called upon in certain situations.
When is a confession not a confession? When it is obtained through brutality. The truth of what really went on inside the police stations of Northern Ireland is finally emerging. Hundreds of men and women found guilty of terrorism offences during the Troubles are planning to appeal. Most were convicted purely on the basis of confessions that they say were beaten out of them by police. After years of silence, former police interrogators have told The Guardian that this brutality was sanctioned at a very high level.
At Castlereagh, Bill Mooney, the head of CID, would be telling us, "Get in there. What are you? Are you men or mice?" And sometimes he would see you in the corridor, and if you hadn't got a result, he would ask, "Do I have to go in there and do a job myself?"
Some of the victims were little more than children.
And my mother said, well, I need to go along with him. And my mother was sort of pleading with him that she should be allowed to go with me. She kept saying to him, he's only a child, he's only 16 years of age.
It was actually burnt in the face with a cigarette. It was actually burnt here in the face with a cigarette, and it was burnt under the chin. I had a lighter held in my testicles. They pulled my tracksuit bottoms down and held a lighter where I could feel the heat burn it, but it didn't actually leave a mark.
Bogside in Derry. For years the scene of violent conflict between Republicans on one side and the police and British Army on the other. Charlie McMenamin was just 16 when he was arrested at his home and questioned about the murder of a policeman.
You always see in our people's homes getting read about the British Army and the RUC, and you never think it would come to your door. But this is the first time anything like this had sort of come to our door. And my mother said, well, I need to go along with him. And my mother was sort of pleading with him that she should be allowed to go with me. She kept saying to him, he's only a child, he's only 16 years of age. And they said, well, we've been instructed by our bosses that no one is to accompany him to the police station.
Charlie took us back to the police station where the interrogation took place.
And to your left now, that's Strand Road police station there. On the top floor of this building here is one of the buildings that where I went through one of the worst interrogations during my time there, and that was on the first day. Looks more like an office block now than it did then, you know. There was a lot of army posts and stuff around it. It was a scary place. They hit me, they tore my hair. Even when at one stage when I felt so low and needed help and support and someone to talk to, I felt like taking my own life. I cut my wrist. Psychologically, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go back to those interviews. But when the doctor interviewed me in relation to that, I told him my concerns. I told him how I felt, but my arms were bandaged up and I was sent back up again. When I was sent back up again, the same detectives, they mocked me and they laughed at me and they bullied me and they thought it was funny that I tried to cut my wrist.
McMenamin eventually confessed to a string of terrorist offences, but the evidence showed that at the time most were being committed, he was inside a secure children's home 75 miles away. Despite his cast-iron alibi, McMenamin was to spend 3 years in jail.
I came out full of hatred for the system and the RUC and British Army, everything. You know, I came out and I got involved in campaigns for prisoners that I had left behind.
By 1973, the British government's policy of internment imprisoning suspects without any trial was widely seen to be an embarrassing failure. That year saw the introduction of the so-called Diplock system, courts with no juries, where a judge could convict people on the basis of a confession alone. It wasn't long before allegations of police brutality began to emerge. One former senior detective, who did not want to be identified, told The Guardian that the beatings were an integral part of policing practice.
There were conversations at a high level in the RUC in 1975, before internment ended. And what happened at Castlereagh happened as a result of those discussions.
Very soon, the police interrogators thought they were winning the war.
By 1977, we were getting headlines every day about the number of people charged, about so-and-so getting 30 years. The Chief Constable was happy, Mooney was happy, the press were happy, everything was wonderful. But there was plenty of slap and tickle, no doubt about it. People were being assaulted.
The interrogators were usually confident they were beating confessions out of guilty people, but they also found it difficult to express any doubts.
Very often you would bring in a lot of people for questioning about the same offence. There would be a conference call each morning, and officers would be really wary of saying that they thought such and such a person wasn't involved, because another team might go in there and get the confession.
Eamon McDermott was arrested in 1977 at his home in Derry and accused of the murder of a police officer. He too was convicted on the basis of a confession that he always insisted had been beaten out of him.
They would just break you down to the stage that you were terrified of them. You just wanted it to stop, and in the atmosphere that they had you, and the easiest way was to give them what they wanted, and then they would stop.
McDermott was to spend more than 15 years behind bars. His conviction was eventually quashed following an investigation by the Criminal Cases Review Commission.
What I find interesting is that when the first time that the Diplock system was scrutinised by any sort of outside agency, it started crumbling. I think there was quite a lot of degree of surprise in the likes of the CCRC that's what was acceptable at the time. And I think that shows up how rotten the whole Diplock system was.
McDermott was a victim of what Republicans and Loyalists call the Conveyor belt system, in which standards of justice were lowered in order to take suspected paramilitaries off the streets.
It was a culture, a legally conservative culture of keeping their heads down, implementing the law, technically very good in the courtroom. I mean, some excellent, lawyers, good at lawyering, but in terms of having a broader professional or moral notion of a responsibility to the rule of law or to standing up, for example, on the issue of torture in the holding centres, that was someone else's job.
By the late 1970s, senior police officers were beginning to have second thoughts about the use of torture at Castlereagh Interrogation Centre.
On the 2nd of January 1980, Jack Herman became Chief Constable, and we soon got a sense that things were changing. We started to detect a change from Bill Mooney straight away. Bill missed the Monday morning conference a couple of times. He was in with Herman. And one day Mooney came out and told us we were not to lay a finger on anybody at Castlereagh. Jack Herman was a strict Presbyterian, and he'd been in charge of community relations. He had a lot of Catholic friends, and he had a lot of good friends in the Catholic clergy, and he knew what was happening was damaging the reputation of the force. He knew it was counterproductive, and he was right.
Despite the appointment of a new Chief Constable, The Guardian found credible evidence of police brutality continuing into the 1990s. In 1991, at the age of 17, Damien Austin was twice arrested and taken to Castlereagh. The first time after a rocket attack which killed one police officer and left a second seriously injured.
I was interrogated, I was slapped, I was punched. I was actually burnt in the face with a cigarette. I was actually burnt here in the face with a cigarette, and I was burnt under the chin. I had a lighter held in my testicles. They pulled my tracksuit bottoms down and held a lighter where I could feel the heat burn it, but it didn't actually leave a mark. It just went on and on and on.
No solicitor present, no other
I
adult
had
present?
no solicitor for 48 hours. So a 17-year-old boy by myself with two intermittent policemen coming in and just constantly questioning, harassing, slapping, punching, that kind of thing.
Amnesty International was so concerned for Austin's safety that for the first time in Northern Ireland it issued an urgent action appeal. After 2 days, he was examined by his own doctor.
My own GP arrived, and in the presence of the police doctor in Castlereagh, he examined me. On this examination, he found the whole right side of my body had been bruised, and obviously I had the injury to my ear. There was marks on my penis and right down the whole right side. He then asked the police doctor, "Can you say that there's no ill treatment going on here?" And the police doctor agreed that there was ill treatment going on.
Damien Austin sued the police, who made an out-of-court settlement.
Girl, isn't that a good girl?
Tommy McKerney was a commander of the IRA in the 1970s. He spent 16 years in prison for the murder of a soldier and was one of the hunger strikers. He too was interrogated at Castlereagh and says the use of torture only deepened the hatred that some had for the security forces.
It's my firm opinion that at best, torturing prisoners will provide a very short-term gain. In the medium term, it's not effective. And in the long term, what it does do, undoubtedly in my opinion, is it embeds a reservoir of hatred and detestation for those who torture and humiliate that doesn't go away in decades and doesn't go away for generations.